All right, online piracy lecture number 2 here. Our big topic today is going to be the sort of evolution of our pirates here to what we refer to as freebooters. So as we move on here to the overview, it says changing environment for piracy, right? I've made this point a few times, but as the rise of commerce here happens, right, as we see more sugar plantations and we see business becoming the main way to fund the economy of places like Jamaica and stuff like that, that business needs to be more consistent. It needs to be more predictable, and pirates do not help that. So now they're going to see pirates as a nuisance and to hurting business. So the people are going to be less supportive of pirates. And as we'll see with this, there's going to be a shift in the pirates themselves. And this is going to cause people to also be less supportive because the pirates are going to be more sort of violent in the sense of sort of arbitrarily violent. And now we'll see the Piracy Act of 1700, which is going to create the use of admiralty courts for pirates, right? And this goes back to the same notion of why they had the admiralty courts in, say, the colonies pre-American Revolution, right? And if you remember that from American history class, the idea was that the admiralty courts, naval courts, right, the admiralty, they are going to be able to try these pirates in places where they won't have any support. So even though the support for pirates was lessening, um, you still had factions that were supportive of them because they would smuggle and do, provide business for groups. And so the admiralty courts was a way to separate pirates from their support, right? And hopefully limit them, right? But the problem, as we're going to see here, is now we've hit our golden age, okay, 1690 to 1730, and we'll look at some of the factors here in a second for why the golden age of piracy was as successful as it was. So the big thing that leads to the golden age of piracy is a glut and a increase, right, in the amount of sailors, namely sailors out of work. So in roughly 1702, so the golden age, right, is 1690, right, to about 1720, give or take, right? It's only 30 years. Like kind of like I was saying before, like the conquistadors. We think about this as a big epic in American, or not necessarily in world history, but in reality, it was like a 10-year period. Same thing here. It's a 30-year period. Um, and the War of Spanish Succession is going to be one of the things, the major thing really that sets this off. So let's talk about what the War of Spanish Succession is. It is a war for the crown of Spain. Okay, King Charles II of Spain will die without an heir, and the French, ironically enough, have the best claim to the throne. The Spanish are going to be the Habsburgs. Remember the Habsburgs of, say, Austria and all that sort of stuff? Well, the French had married into their royal bloodline the Habsburg daughter to the had been king. So they really had the strongest claim to being the heirs to the Spanish throne. And the Spanish throne would bring with it the Spanish Empire, which wasn't as big time as it had been, but it was still important, right? And so in that, the idea that you would create this sort of like super state, right, would upset the balance of power in Europe. And that meant that Europe, the big powers of Europe that were left, would band together to fight against that happening. So you'll have what they refer to as the Grand Alliance for all my European history guys. We're not concerned with all that. It's not a European history class. What we are concerned with is that the English realize they're never going to have a land empire in Europe, and so they begin to focus on their navy, right? And we start to see the birth of the sort of English sort of tradition of naval excellence, if you will. And so they will provide that. They invade with their army a couple times in certain places, but it's not really as influential as, say, what become the German states and stuff like that. Now, because of this war, one, England isn't really going to focus on stopping piracy. Two, with the expansion of all these European navies, all those sailors I was talking about are going to be put to work, right? And so eventually, with the end of the Spanish War of Succession in 1713, all of those sailors are now going to be out of work, okay? And so that glut of sailors that had been successful, either privateers or in the Royal Navy, are now, have a certain set of skills, like Liam Neeson would say, and they have no job. And so a lot of them are going to go on the account, as they say, right, or take the black, which is, I know, a Game of Thrones reference, but in reality, right, they're going to become pirate crews. Now, you can see down here the Royal Navy, right, 5 ships on the East Coast, 4 in the Caribbean in 1715, and by 1716 they start to add more. And this is going to start to shift in the notion of, hey, we got to take care of the piracy stuff here. A lot of the stuff we look at in this section is going to be kind of um, all happening at the same time, right? We're kind of going to be in a 30-year period, kind of going back and forth. And so now we're going to go back and kind of talk about this notion of what a freebooter is, right? So right after the War of Spanish Succession, there's this explosion in the growth of piracy, and we're going to call these guys the freebooters. Now, our first group, remember, were I'll even change the color here, the gentlemen pirates, right? Or gentlemen adventurers, right? And that's Sir Francis Drake. Our second group, right, were the Buccaneers, and that's old Sir Henry Morgan. Now, you'll notice there the whole sirs, right? But these groups were the precursors to the freebooters, and the freebooter is what we think of when we think of out-and-out pirates and guys sailing under the black flag. So 1700s pirates, right, large labor pool after the war, and the character of these guys was going to be drastically different than what we had seen with the gentlemen adventurers or the buccaneers. The biggest difference is right here. They will attack anyone. And if you'll notice with the sirs, the big difference there is that those other guys were sailing for king and country, where the freebooters are not. They're sailing for themselves, right? That's the whole notion. They're not sailing for the flag anymore. And so since they're not sailing for the flag, they're seen as more dangerous. Since they have no allegiance, right? They were sort of attacking the social order, which leads us to this idea of the social bandit. Okay, social bandit is a guy that commits crime for any other reason besides monetary gain. You know, to fight the system, to make a political statement, whatever. That falls into this idea of social bandit. The classical example of the social bandit is Robin Hood, right? I'm going to attack the Sheriff of Nottingham's men to steal the money to give it back to the poor kind of idea. These guys, though, right, remember who these sailors are, right? They're like the lowest of the low. They are the like dregs of society. And so they really don't like the social order because they are at the bottom. Okay. So they're going to really fight against this and really adopt, this sort of notion of not necessarily Robin Hood, but like, that the establishment is bad and that like governments are bad, right? That kind of notion. And on the flip side of this, if you were like a government, you're going to see these guys as a threat to social stability, right? You're going to see these guys as a threat to what you've created. All right, now, continuing on here with the freebooters. What's going to happen is during this time period, specifically in the colonies, you're going to start to see merchants having more and more privateering crews, right? You remember privateers, letters of marque, all that good stuff. And they are going to utilize this as a way to enrich their trade, right? And, smuggle goods and all that sort of stuff. So Boston, New York, Philadelphia, all are going to use this. They're all going to use pirates and smugglers, namely to get into the Caribbean trade, but also, as we'll see, trade on the other side of the world as well. So Charleston, South Carolina, during this time period, becomes kind of the new Port Royal, right? There's even a Port Royal, South Carolina, as you guys probably put on the map, as we talked about earlier this year. The original Port Royal will slide into the sand or the sea, right? Thanks to an earthquake, which we watched that video about already. But the destruction of Port Royal is the end of the Buccaneer, right? That's the notion here. Okay. Okay, it's the end of the Buccaneer. with the earthquake and ending Port Royal. Even though Tortuga's still there, the Buccaneer is kind of no more. So British serious about piracy, Robert Holmes and the anti-Buccaneer squadron, could be called anti-piracy squadron, whatever you want to call it, right? They are going to set out to rid, the Caribbean and North America of piracy. But like I mentioned before, we're going to be a little bit of contradictory as we talk about this. The Caribbean was a really, sort of like funnel, narrow place for like attacking shipping. But in reality, it was a large area. So if you're going to really put your resources in chasing pirates, those pirates are just going to move to other parts of the sea, right? The other parts of the Caribbean. And that's what happens. Now, this takes us to one of the more sort of famous things of this time period, right? Because what's going to happen is, well, one, let me look at the map I put on here. This big map of world trade and trade routes and where it's controlled, right? The hotspots for piracy during this time period, one, right, the Caribbean, which we know, but two, basically the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, even over there, and eventually we'll talk about the South China Sea over here. But the coasts of Africa, all that sort of stuff. But you can see from where these trade routes are where pirates are going to be, right? And what we're about to talk about now is what they refer to as the pirate round. And you're going to have guys that set sail out of the Caribbean, North America. They're going to sail down around the coast, around, sometimes they make a stop off in Madagascar, sometimes they don't. And they're going to sail up in here in the Arabian Sea and then into the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea, make a loop, and sail back. They're going to plunder, excuse me, they're going to plunder the shipping in these regions, as we'll see with, Captain Kidd and Henry Avery and these kind of bigger than life guys. But one of the things that's going to happen is the merchants of North America here are going to do this, right, as a way to finance a lot of their stuff. So privateers, right, what they're going to do is, merchants are going to get their money together. They're going to hire a privateer to sail over here and do it because they're not going to be under as much scrutiny had they have done it amongst British shipping. But realize this is that time period where there's that shift now away from like worrying about if it's Britain or not. So the pirate round, like I was saying, what it's called, you can see in the picture, 1693 to 1700, brief period of time as well. The popularity of trade in the Indian Ocean, the taking of those, namely Muslim and Hindu vessels, the colonies, right, to the Caribbean, to the Red Sea, to Indian Sea, or Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, I should say, and back. Some of the famous guys, Thomas Tew, it gets really started with Adam Baldridge here. Baldridge will be a merchant from New England, and he will go set sail to, trade and then, privateer on the way and make a lot of money. But Avery and Kidd are going to be the guys we're really concerned with. All right, so 1690, transitional period here. Henry Avery, right, English privateer, meaning a letter of marque, sailing officially for a country, right? He's going to fit into our freebooter thing, as you'll see, but initially he will be a privateer. His ship will be the Fancy, okay? And you're going to read an article, like I said before, about Avery, or a chapter about Avery, and in it you'll get all the background on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But what will happen is he will attack Muslim merchant vessels in the Indian Ocean that were being sort of dealt with by the British East India Company. The British East India Company was making deals with these leaders out in the Muslim Arab world, if you will, and they didn't like privateers attacking those vessels because in the Persian Gulf, right, they are going to see any white British guy as working for the British, right? Even though he's a independent contractor, we'll say they will see him basically as the Royal Navy. So he'll capture 2 pilgrim vessels in the Persian Gulf. That's another thing going on, right? A lot of these guys they're making their Hajj, right, and they're going to Mecca. And when a lot of these folks would do that, they would bring like their entire families, right? It's a once in a lifetime trip for some of these people. And so since they would bring all their families and all these people, there was always a lot of money there. As it says right here, King of the Pirates, we'll get to that in a second. What's going to happen is eventually he's going to be tried but yet again, they're going to be unwilling to convict him. The East India Company, though, is going to have it out for him. Okay, we'll see with Kidd here in a second. It's a little bit different story, but what's going to happen here is with Avery is he's going to get all this stuff, right? He's going to get all this plunder, but they're basically like, if you bring that plunder into England, you're going to go to jail, right? You can't do it. And so, in different variations of the account, different accounts of what happened. One, he's going to smuggle himself into Devon, and he's going to then have to like sell all these things at rock bottom prices because everybody knows that it's all like contraband, and he's not supposed to have it, so he doesn't really have a leg to stand on in dealing with it, so he'll die impoverished. Now, the more romantic story was that um, he took one of the princesses that he supposedly found on one of these pilgrim vessels, and that he sailed to Madagascar and established himself as a pirate king on one of these islands and ruled there with this woman that he had stolen from the harem of this, sultan or whatever. Um, the bigger thing, though, right, is yet again he was an English privateer that was supposed to be sailing under the guise of the English flag, and he goes away from that, right? He goes away from that and sails under the guise, uh, under the black flag, right? And when you're reading about this, yet again, it fills in more of the details. I'm not going to spend my time doing it, but that's the big thing, right? Is he sails against the interests of the British East India Company and England. So, William Kidd. Kidd is, whoops. Kidd is a great example or history here of freebooter. So it says minister's son. There might be some legitimate history that he's Scottish, from Dundee more than likely, and his dad could have been a minister in the church, but we don't really know. There weren't any records for that time period, so it's really like an oral tradition that makes him a minister's son. And eventually he's going to sail to New York City, where he's going to marry a widow who had come into a lot of money after the death of her first husband, but she had been married twice before. And this is going to kind of plug him into high society, right? All the while, though, he is going to be a sort of pseudo ship captain sailor guy, right? He'll capture French islands where they'll loot and pillage and all that sort of stuff. He wasn't a well-liked guy. It's his Navy merchant captains had absolute control. Pirates varied, but need to get along with crews. So what's going to happen is, right, we've already kind of broached this opinion before, but the notion is, right, that pirate crews had to, like, agree to stuff, right? He's going to be a privateer, right? That's the big thing. And so he's going to really fall under this kind of merchant captain Navy thing. And so he's going to try to rule with an absolute fist, iron fist kind of idea. And that's not going to be useful for him. Now, he's going to go back to London. And he's going to begin to round up investors for this anti-pirate privateer, a guy by the name of Lord Belmont, who was actually the governor of Massachusetts and New Hampshire at that time, called upon him to go and attack Thomas Tew and all those guys that were the Pirates of the Round guys we talked about before, and weed out this piracy. That was what he wanted them to do. And to do that, he's going to hire Kidd. Now, Kidd really couldn't turn it down because it's like the president asking you to do something, right? You have to do it. So he's going to go around and get investors, and eventually they will set sail in the Adventure Galley. Now, the Adventure Galley is a galley, so it has oars, okay? But he, was renowned. Well, he was very proud of the fact that he, hand-selected his crew and all this sort of stuff, and as they're sailing out of the Thames, right there by London, he is going to fail to salute a naval frigate right there. And with this, the Navy then pulls him over and impresses a third of his crew, because during a wartime, that was seen as like a fair, legitimate thing. Now, from here, he's going to then have to sail to New York, where he's going to get kind of a new group of guys for his crew, which are all going to be like scallywags and hardened criminals and stuff like that. Now, from this point on, Kidd, right, is going to be seen as like out of kind of a breach of contract, if you will, of his terms. When you watch the video on Kidd, it's like a little 20-minute like TV show about him. They'll get into this as well. So, make sure I'm on the right spot. Yeah. Up here, you can see the route of the Adventure Galley, right? They set sail, they head to New York, and then from New York, it's back to Madeira, and then on into uh, making that pirate round like we talked about. And they're famously going to take the Quetta merchant, right? That's going to be the big thing. Now, I guess I should wind it all back up here. First, the crew is going to be unhappy, and William Monroe is going to step up to Kidd. And like I said before, Kidd was disliked because he was arrogant and a jerk, and he is going to smash a bucket in the face of Monroe, which will kill him. And this will be the kind of like the death nail of Kidd. And what I mean by that is when he goes to trial for all the kind of stuff that he's done wrong here, the death of Monroe will be the one thing he can't justify. So, in the Indian Ocean, he will see the Ruparel, which is an English ship. Okay, um, he is going to raise a French flag. They are going to raise French flags, and it's going to be sort of like a, we don't want to be English because we're probably both not supposed to be here situation. Even though they realized the Ruparel was really English, and when they both raised French flags, then they realized they were English. Kidd is still going to seize the Ruparel, even though he knows it's an English ship. Now, what he's going to do in court yet again is he's going to go and say, hey, my letter of marque is I could seize French ships. We didn't believe them that they were saying they were really English, and so we seized them. We took them a prize. Obviously, Kidd was being a turd, right? He knew those were Englishmen, and he was just doing it to make personal gains there. 1698, he's going to seize the Quetta merchant, right? Seize eventually renames it the Adventure Prize. Here's a picture of the Quetta merchant, right, or a picture illustration, if you will. What's going to happen is, as you might or might not know, is this valuable cargo, right, is going to be, I think it's over here off the Indian coast, the Malabar coast. It's going to be like part of the like Sultan of India's like deal with the British East India Company. So this will set off alarm bells in London, and they want Kidd's head. And so Kidd, right, is going to hightail it back to the Caribbean and not going to find any peace there. He's going to go back to Lord Belmont, the guy that hired him in the first place, and tries to buy a pardon, and also not going to work. And Belmont knows who butters his bread, so he's going to throw him in jail. Eventually, they're going to take him to an admiralty court. And from this, the East India Company gets involved, right? And they really have it out for Kidd. Now, Kidd's letters of marque aren't going to be easily found in the archives. When you watch the video, you'll see all this. But on May 23rd, he will be sentenced to death for piracy, right? And there's a lot of sort of like circumstantial evidence that kind of puts Kidd in this situation, which is why that video you're going to watch is talked about the Captain Kidd conspiracy. Now, so he will be hung to death May 23rd, 1701. His body will be put in a metal frame, as it says right there, in an area close to a waterway, so that people can see the fate of pirates. Now, we're not going to get to do it this semester because of, the corona outbreak thing. But when we watch Pirates of the Caribbean, at the beginning of the Pirates of the Caribbean, they show, Johnny Depp sailing into Port Royal, I think is where it's supposed to be. And he sees the dead pirates hanging there, right? And this, yet again, is an example of how Pirates of the Caribbean at times was, actually historically correct. Now, one of the things here is that supposedly Kidd dumped his treasure on Long Island, right? Famously, also, if you look up William Kidd treasure, you'll see that Google has made use Google Maps to find William Kidd's treasure YouTube video. I recommend that. Now, in reality, like I mentioned before, pirates do not bury their treasure very often. It wasn't like a retirement account, right? For the most part, it was this notion of like a short time. Like the heat's on us, we got to bury this treasure so we can like talk to the authorities kind of thing and then go back and get it. Or if we couldn't carry it, we bury it, that kind of thing. But no one ever has found Captain Kidd's lost treasure. And there's a treasure map and all this sort of stuff. And supposedly as he was going to the gallows, he said that there was like 200 bars of silver for whoever would like free him kind of thing, and that he had hid it. I don't know if that's true or not, but yet again, it's one of those stories. Kidd's story, though, represents changing times, right? Morgan, he had broke the law, right, of the Treaty of Madrid, but he went to England and was treated like a hero. Kidd, on the other hand, broke kind of English law and is going to be treated like a scoundrel, right? Because the East India Company was making money. Okay, that's the big thing. They were making money. He interrupted that money and made it not consistent, and people got upset. And he worked yet again on his own interests, which, as we know, makes him a freebooter. Alrighty, guys, this is what I got for this week. I hope everybody's okay. I will talk to you later.